Alright,
Just double checking.
we got the last 10 pull.
Oh,
Ikuzo! I don't want to! I want to save pity for Zhongli!
Damn!
I hate you. I fucking hate you.
My tuner luck is
I
strong
fucking hate you because I'm not gonna activate this. God damn, it's just gonna sit in my fucking inventory.
I jinxed it. I jinxed it.
And it's
another D1!
I'm trying so hard not to yell right now because it's late and I have neighbors. God damn it, my pity.
Tuner's streamer luck goes to all.
No, it's that we know it's gonna be child,
Nice.
guys, because I just got a gene, so we knew the next 5-star was gonna be on banner, and I wanted to save it for Zhongli.
Yeah, it had to.
I didn't think I would get it at 30 fucking pity. What the fuck is this? Oh wait, no, this is 40 pity. Still, cause I'm not gonna activate the constellation on child, cause I have to test him, and it's gonna bias the testing. God damn it! Oh god damn it!
Get fucked. I made you pull a 5-star.
God damn it!
Wait, quick. Everybody who wants to roll right now, pull your roll. Get ready to pull your rolls, and then ask me for luck. I shall give it to you. I shall give you a 5-star, my child. I shall give you.
Oh god, this is gonna bother me so much. I can't activate this constellation because it'll bias my testing.
Blue
But it's
Needle,
just
I
gonna
give
be
you
a
luck.
fucking exclamation
I
mark
think
for
I
the
give
rest
you
of my
luck.
account's career.
Megalith, I give you luck.
The rest of my account's
Julius, I
career is
give
just
you
gonna be a
luck.
fucking exclamation
JL, I
mark
give
right
you
there.
luck. Sifu, I give you luck. Moshi got a 5-star.
Hey everyone, it's Jinx and I'm a Genshin Hunter math guy now. As you saw in that beautiful opening clip, I managed to get a C1 child that I will never activate because I don't want the constellation to bias my testing when making content for you guys. Oh, and then when I hopped off stream, I hopped onto my second account to go ahead and condense resin, and then I decided to just pull with my 900 saved up primogens, and this happened. Now, I'm not complaining about having a child on both accounts, especially because my second account does have a Mona on it, so I can test some Mona child comps and see how they work. But because I was only at like 30 pity or something on my other accounts, I wasn't expecting to pull child until later in the week, so it's gonna be a second till my child's strong enough and I have enough materials to get him to the level he needs to be to test those Mona comps. Anyway, the point of this video is to just give my brief first impressions of Childe and Diona. I also do apologize beforehand, this video is gonna be relatively minimally edited because I want to get this information out as soon as possible. I also want to make sure to mention that the set and bow I'm using on Childe right now are super scuffed, and he's still getting pretty decent output when he's on field, but we will discuss his issues as well as his strengths in a bit. Just keep in mind that the numbers you're seeing on screen are far from optimized for a proper Childe set. I'd probably ballpark I'm missing anywhere from 30 to 50% of his potential damage output just because my set is so goddamn scuffed right now. Now, I know the burning question on anyone's mind is Childe worth pulling for in this banner? And the answer to that is maybe. Real talk, it's been like less than a day since Childe came out, and he is by far the most unique character we've ever gotten. He does not fit into traditional roles in a team composition, meaning you do have to build team comps around how his weird quirkiness works. If anyone is currently telling you that he's either overpowered or underpowered, I would take those kinds of recommendations with massive grains of salt right now, because it is genuinely too early to say because of how different and complex he is as a character and how the team comps have to be built around him. This donation message from Yonghyun I got yesterday in stream pretty much sums up exactly how I feel about him. At launch, pretty much everyone's probably gonna think he's underpowered, and that's fair, but he is one of those characters who we can unlock potential the more we learn about how to use him properly. And the inverse is also true because people who do not understand how total team damage calculations work may think he's actually overpowered. See, I haven't done the damage calculations yet, but the impression I've gotten is that when Childe is on the field doing his thing, he deals the most damage out of pretty much any character currently. However, if you don't understand how your team's total damage calculations work, you don't realize that he actually has factors and quirkiness about him that actually hurt your total DPS and make him maybe not nearly as good as he seems at first. However, even after we unlock his potential, I genuinely do not know if he will compete with Klee, Diluc, Keqing, and Venti, who pretty much everyone across CN tier lists, our tier lists, and other various EN tier lists pretty much agree are the god tier characters in the game that just output way more than anyone else. But we'll get into that after I explain a few more things about Childe and my first impressions on him. So for this video, I am going to talk about just some of his general mechanics basics, as well as various things we tested in terms of interactions with him and gear. And then I'll be talking about some pros and cons about Childe, as well as just my general current first impression conclusions on him. But remember, take everything with a giant grain of salt. It has not even been 24 hours since Childe came out yet, so any opinions I have are just that, they're opinions. And anything else anyone else says about him is also still just that, they're just opinions. He is far too complex a character to really understand at the moment, and frankly, it's gonna take possibly weeks for us to fully understand his potential. Okay, so let's talk his just basic mechanics. So Childe, as you probably know, is a stance switching character. By default, he is a bow character, and his bow combo, I haven't tested it, but it's a bow combo, so it's probably pretty weak. But when he does press his E, his elemental skill, he does a small burst of damage and switches into a melee stance. The damage in this melee stance is actually incredibly high. There's two reasons for this. One, his basic combos just do a lot of raw damage. Again, I haven't gone around to frame counting yet, so I can't give you precise values, but the point is it is very high. I was told by someone else that it's around the level of DPS that Keqing's charge attack spam has, which by the way is the highest DPS basic attack combo in the game. But again, I haven't seen data, so grain of salt. On top of that, he has a mechanic where he can mark enemies with a thing called Riptide. Normally, you have to use bow form, charge attacks, or ultimates to apply Riptide, but once you hit Ascension 4, your critical hits will apply Riptide. Now, when you hit this Riptide mark with melee attacks, you deal a nice little burst of extra damage, and this has a cooldown of 1.5 seconds in between each activation of the mark. And if you stick around on Childe and keep attacking these targets with the mark on them, then you can get 1 Hydro Particle every time this mark procs, which is 1 per 1.5 seconds, which is an incredibly fast amount of energy generation. And no, this does not burn the mark, so at Ascension 2, this mark lasts for 18 seconds. So realistically, you only need enough crit chance to get the mark applied initially relatively quickly, and then you kinda don't have to worry about it. And because the mark persists if you switch off the character, it gives you some interesting combo potential in terms of how you micro your team's rollouts. Again, Childe combos can get incredibly complex, and we haven't even touched the surface of how complex it can get yet. Now, with how much raw output of damage he can put out while he is in his melee stance, you probably think, okay, yeah, so Childe is pretty clearly supposed to be a carry, right? Well, here's the issue. See, the longer you stay in his stance, up to a max of 30 seconds, the longer the cooldown gets. And as previously mentioned, at least at first glance, his bow combos don't seem very good. This means he kind of ends up being this weird sort of selfish burst carry support character that does a lot of damage when on field, but then you have to somehow fill the time waiting for his cooldowns to come back up. But anyway, we'll discuss that more in his pros and cons in a second. Now, as for his ult has two versions, one when he's in bow form where he just shoots a giant Hydro Explosion. It's got really decent damage as well as applies the Riptide mark to everything. Then his melee version instead deals more damage in a circle around him, and if it hits anything with a Riptide mark on them, you do an additional burst of damage and AoE explosion. There are some pretty nutty wombo combos potential with this ult specifically. Between managing the cooldown on his elemental skill by deciding how long you want to stay in that form doing high DPS, between deciding which of your ults to use or if you chain them back to back off cooldown off of each other, combined with how you have to work your entire team around this, he gets really complicated. But if you're like me and you really enjoy optimizing these kinds of things, he is incredibly fun to play. And for those curious, in last night's stream, we did test out several different weapon passive and mechanics as well as artifact sets with him to see how they worked. So first off, as long as you can fit in some other crit chance in your build, it looks like Rust is going to be his best 4-star option because yes, the Rust passive to basic attacks does apply to his melee form. And no, unfortunately, Sacrificial Bow is not gonna work on him. So at least from our testing, when you're in melee stance, every single one of your basic attacks can trigger the Sacrificial Bow proc. However, the problem is even though it triggers, your cooldown hasn't started until you exit melee stance. So you trigger Sacrificial Bow's effect, it just doesn't do anything. Now, if you don't happen to have any kind of crit in your build, like from a critical chance helmet or something, you may want to consider getting a critical chance substat weapon, like maybe the Viridescent Hunt from the Battle Pass. And yes, Compound Bow's passive does apply to Child's melee attacks, however the lack of substat working for his melee form does kind of hurt it as an option. And I haven't done super thorough testing on this yet, but it seems that Stringless's passive only seems to work on the Riptide explosions when you're in melee stance, not on your actual melee attacks because they are not considered elemental skill damage. On top of that, EM's kind of a useless stat on Child because he's basically Aura's the Aura character. As always, if you don't know what an Aura element character is, just watch this video, we explain it in there. See, Child is just like Keqing, he's basically always going to be an Aura elemental character because he applies water arguably faster than Keqing can apply Electro. So unfortunately, his elemental mastery is generally not the stat that is being used to calculate reaction damage. Prototype Crescent also looks really solid, I'm just not 100% sure if it's still always better than Compound Bow even with its passive just because I haven't been able to frame count Child yet and figure out how much the attack speed boost actually helps him. And if you want to focus more on doing Vaporized Burst ult rotations on Child, then Favonius Bow is a nice option for that. I am going to just need to do a lot more testing and math calculations on the bows to figure out what the actual order of precedence goes. For now, just know Rust is the best, everything else kinda works. And also, I'm like 80% sure that the 5-star bows should beat Rust, but again, I haven't calculated it, so stay tuned for that. Now, for artifact sets, unfortunately, Gladiators does not work in his melee form, which means that his builds are kinda scuffed right now. So, Gambler's 2-piece, which does increase the damage of his elemental skill, does not actually increase the damage of his melee basic attacks. They do, however, increase the damage of the Riptide procs, but those are such a low percentage of your total damage output in melee form, I don't necessarily think it's worth investing into Gamblers. Now, I haven't gone around to testing it yet, but 4-piece Gamblers seems like an interesting option for Child, even though you lose the ability to run 5-star artifacts on Gamblers. Its passive would ideally allow you to have 100% uptime on his E if you use it correctly, however, there may be some issues with this that I have to test. See, my concern is that Child may have to be the one to get the killing damage on a target to proc this passive. This means if you have Xingqiu ult up, if you have any kind of passive damage from your Fischl, Beidou, or anything else in your team comp going, if they get the killing hits, you may not be able to activate the passive, which makes this functionally really hard to run if that's the case. However, I haven't tested it yet, so grain of salt. However, we do know that this is how the 4-set bonus for Bloodstained Chivalry works, so it's likely to be the case. Now, until we get a Hydro set that will most likely just be in general best in slot for him, he kinda just has really scuffed sets. In terms of 4-set bonuses, the best looking one is going to be 4-piece Martial Artist, but again, Martial Artist can't be 5-starred, which does hurt its actual damage potential a lot. You could also run Noblesse on him to increase his burst damage output, but his basic attacks in melee form do so much damage you really want to be amping those. Now, you could run Wandering Troop on him because the Wandering Troop 4-set bonus does apply to his melee charge attacks. The issue there is you have the charge attack spam. Now, his charge attack spam does seem like it's a pretty high DPS. Again, I haven't frame counted yet, but the values are high and it is very fast. But you have so much knockback on your charge attack spam, unless you're against a big target, it's not necessarily a good option. So right now, my tentative general set for him is probably just gonna be a 2-piece Martial Artist and a 2-piece Gladiators. One of the Martial Artist pieces is going to be your Flowers, so you lose as little damage as possible from having to run 2 4-stars in your build, but otherwise, I just really don't know what's gonna work on him. Unlike other damage characters, he can't use Gladiators, and he doesn't have an elemental set like Thundering Fury, Thunder Soothers, Lava Walkers, Witches, and things like that you can work in instead. So yeah, like I said, his sets are kinda scuffed right now. This, however, is probably only a temporary thing, because eventually I'm sure they'll release a Hydro set that he can use very well. And for those wondering, no, Thundering Fury on him in Electroshock team is not going to be good. Again, he's almost always going to be the Aura character, so his stats don't matter for the Electroshock damage. Of course, they did have to bug fix Electroshock in 1.1, and I haven't seen any testing on it yet, nor have I done any testing, so this may not be 100% true if they somehow mess up and bug out Electroshock again, but it should not work that way at least. Stay tuned, eventually I'll be able to get around to some testing on that, or find some other testing done by someone else. And yes, you can just run Bow Lead on him and have a Geo support for shields. The problem is if you get hit once and the shield breaks, that means you now have to switch off of him and activate the cooldown on his melee form to get another shield, so I don't think it's a good option unless you're really good at not getting hit. But yeah, so that's pretty much the mechanics we've tested with Childe so far. Rust seems like the best option, and his artifact sets are just kinda scuffed. But his artifact sets being scuffed is most likely a temporary thing, because when new artifact sets come out, like a Hydro set, he will potentially just run that all the time. Alright, so let's talk about his pros and cons real quick, and why he's kind of a complicated, complex character. First pro, he does an absolute metric fuckton of damage and DPS when he's in his melee form. Again, in the footage on screen, I am missing anywhere from 30 to 50% of my damage output, possibly more, because I just do not have the stuff yet to make Childe strong. And that's 30 to 50% of a level 60 Childe's output, not a maxed out level 80 or 90. And the just general DPS output of his melee form is incredibly high. Also, his ults do a lot of damage and are on a 15-second cooldown and are very easy to generate quickly. Because while Childe is in his melee form and on the field and attacking things, he is generally able to generate one Hydro particle every 1.5 seconds, which is incredibly fast energy generation. It's pretty easy to start a fight with Childe by ulting in bow form, which by the way does refund 20 energy if you use the bow ult instead, then switching to your melee stance, beating stuff, and then getting your ult up for the melee form before the cooldown's even up. This may end up being one of his more optimal burst damage rotations, we're not sure yet, although burst is in big quotation marks because you still have to be on the field for 15 seconds to make this happen, so it's not really burst. But the point is, when Childe is on field, he does a lot of damage in his melee form. But this brings us to his first issue, his first caveat, because the cooldown on his E is pretty long if you stay on the field to do this full rotation. This means that unlike Razor, Diluc, Klee, Keqing, he is not a true carry because his bow attacks aren't very good. The point of a carry on your team is to be a stacked character that does a good amount of damage with the basic attacks so they can fill the gaps while all of your team's abilities are on cooldown. Childe cannot do this well, because once he is out of his melee form, his bow DPS just isn't that great. At least in terms of my first impressions. Again, I haven't been able to do any actual damage calculations for it yet. This puts us in a really awkward position with him, and why his team compositions feel so awkward, because you need a second carry on the team. Because when Childe's E is on cooldown, you need another carry to be able to fill the gaps with basic attacks and their combos and everything like that while you're waiting for his melee stance to be off cooldown again about 15 seconds later or so. This means he ends up playing a bit more like a burst support like Venti or Mona or Jinx, where you just switch to him every 15 to 20 seconds and do some damage. The problem is, unlike those characters, he has to stay on field for an extended period of time. This means that he is going to be cutting into the DPS uptime of your other carry, who should be doing more damage and filling that space otherwise, while he also has low uptime on his own DPS due to the cooldown on his melee stance. Yes, Childe does an insane amount of output when he is on field in his melee stance, but you also have to factor in the uptime you can actually do that realistically in a team composition, which is roughly around 50% from what it looks like so far. Now, because he can't be overlapping DPS with your other carry like other supports can, this means that this could potentially really hurt how much DPS he actually deals for your team. But he doesn't fill a traditional carry role because he's not good at gap filling between cooldowns, but he does have very high burst when he's in his actual melee stance, but his burst requires him to stay on field, taking away DPS uptime from your carry, so he's just weird. He's this weird, selfish burst support character that does a lot of good damage but has low uptime, but has to take away uptime from your carry to be able to be used, and he's just weird. I've been running him with Bennett because my Bennett can act as that second carry for him, where they just rotate off cooldown with Bennett popping his ult, doing his stuff, and switching to Childe, doing his stuff, and switching back to Bennett to ult again, etc, etc, but I genuinely don't know how good the overall DPS of that team really is. Again, a lot more testing, a lot more calculations have to be done. His ceiling is potentially very high, I just don't know if that ceiling is high enough to compare to the other god carries in the game currently, because he's not truly a carry. And on top of that, compared to the god tier carries Klee, Diluc, and Keqing, he cannot hold a candle anyway because he can't deal pyro damage. For those of you who don't know, Abyss Floor 12 is the most difficult content in the game, and any pyro damage is boosted by 75%. Keqing can do this through an overload comp, and then obviously Klee and Diluc just do pyro damage. Simply because Childe can't do pyro damage, he will not compete for the same investment compared to these other characters in Abyss 12. But that's only for the current 1.1 patch. We are likely going to get more difficult content later on where different elements may be stronger than others. But at least currently, the most difficult content in the game, where you really need to be tweaking out every bit of damage you can, simply favors pyro damage comps. But he also isn't truly a burst support because he is selfish in how he does his burst support DPS. Meaning, compared to say Venti, who is the god tier burst DPS in the game, he can't hold a candle. Now, he is incredibly fun to play, so if you want to pull for him just because of that, he is going to be a pretty strong character. But if you do care about his power level and you want to make sure that teams with Childe in them are actually god tier teams, we just don't know yet. He has a lot of weird quirkiness and he has a lot of issues with his uptime that we are still figuring out if that can be worked around or not to really unlock his damage potential. Alright, finally, let's just quickly talk about Diona, because Diona is super easy to talk about because she does fit into a traditional character role. Diona is a Chi-Chi with less healing and a shield and a bit more burst damage. That's about it. Her cryo application is either worse or about on par with Chi-Chi, so you probably still want to mix her with a Kaya if you're planning on running like a superconduct comp. The problem is her ult does apply cryo constantly, but it applies like every 3 or 4 seconds or so. It's a really slow application. And her E is a burst damage skill, so it does apply a lot of cryo, it's just you have to switch to her and it's only one time. But similar to how Xingqiu works, you do want to run a sacrificial bow on her because it does seem to be able to proc off of every hit of a charge E, which hits 5 times. Keep in mind, I say it seems to because again, I haven't gone around to actually accurately testing that. But being able to do 2 bursts of her charge E is going to be 10 projectiles, each doing almost 60% damage per hit, so it's a pretty decent amount of burst damage. Also, just like a Saxol Xingqiu, this is going to be giving you a total of 8 elemental particles, which generates her ult very quickly. And her ult healing is really good, and at the end of the day, she's a healer, so you're probably going to end up running her in a lot of team comps just because of the lack of healers in the game. I will say, personally, I will probably run her over Chi-Chi just because I value her burst damage versus Chi-Chi's much better healing personally. Unfortunately, she is not going to be the key piece that enables a melt comp for Klee because, again, her cryo application just isn't very fast. Which means that at least for the moment, the strong melt teams in the game are still just gonna be melee teams because of the Chongyun conversion support thing. But yeah, she's a healer, she does decent burst damage, and she is a cryo type, so definitely a good character. But similar to Xingqiu, you are going to need to have a sack bow to really unlock her burst damage potential, and be able to basically spam her ult off of cooldown, even without Constellation 1, although Constellation 1 makes that a lot easier to do. Alright, that is all I had for this video, everyone. It apparently ended up taking 20 minutes, because I guess there was just a lot to talk about in terms of Childe, even though there's only been about 6 to 7 hours of testing on him so far. As always, thank you so much for checking out the video. Hopefully you learned something from my first impressions after about 6 or 7 hours of testing Childe, so if you did, be sure to like the video, comment, and share it with your friends. This pushes it up in the YouTube search algorithm so more people get to see it. Also, don't forget to check out Tuner's Twitch over at twitch.tv/Tuner. I am going to be hanging out with him a little bit after this video comes out, and he is currently streaming and doing some 1.1 stuff. And if you want to see the most up-to-date information about the channel or the various things I'm testing on Childe or things like that, be sure to check out our Twitters. The Jinx Mathless is my personal one, and Jinx Tuner is going to be the company account run by Tuner. And don't forget, we do have our Discord server, the Mathlos Nest, amazing community of people there all sharing information, learning together, so definitely come hang out. And last but definitely not least, a huge thank you to our patrons who have been selflessly helping support the channel for such a beautifully long time. I say it every video, but I will always say it, y'all the best. Alright, I am gonna go get some lunch because I am hungry. And pretty much this entire week's gonna be devoted to me testing out Childe and Diona, so if you want to see any of those videos as soon as they come out, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, you know, all that good jazz. Happy waifu hunting whalers, we'll see you in the next one. Bye!